Let me readjust this thing.
All right, I did hit the record. We're live on Facebook. We're live on the internet. And we got a minute before we got to fire off this conversation. This is going to be this is going to be very interesting, very good conversations, important conversations. And so when I want important stuff, I go get important people. Yeah. So, anyway, we're up to 14,000 people live with us right now, Val.
All right.
And Chan's ahead of the game. He knows what Randy's going to ask him.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
So he already chimed in and told everybody he's from Greensboro.
Hey, Val, we had somebody last couple times or so from Italy.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we get them from as far away in the U.S. as San Francisco. We've gotten them, I think, from Canada.
Fantastic.
Italy and all parts in between.
Randy has global stalkers, man. Global stalkers.
Yeah, I tell you, we've had some fantastic guests. This has been an education for me as well, not just for our viewers. And I used some of the content from Daniel from last week and also from one of our other presenters. And I kind of worked that into my article that'll be in the Winston-Salem Journal this coming Sunday.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So.
Did you credit where credit was appropriate?
I couldn't remember. But I put in a kind of a backdoor plug for our show without naming the show because I didn't want to.
Oh, good. A plug for our show. Yeah. So,
yeah, I'll talk to the editors about that.
All right. It's noon. So welcome, everybody. I'm Teddy Burris. This is my good friend, Mr. Randy Wooden, and my other good friend, Mr. Val Boston III. And welcome to, is Val the perch that holds you and I up on your screen too, Randy?
Yeah, he's here. You're to my.
Up, man. Yeah. So Eileen's jumping in and saying hi. So Randy, go ahead and you know what you need to do next, right?
I do.
Okay,
it's only been a few months, but yeah, I'm in charge of housekeeping today. But first, a little brief introduction about me. Then I'll turn it to Teddy. He'll introduce himself and then introduce our guest this week. My name is Randy Wooden. I work for Goodwill Industries of Northwest North Carolina. We are a 31 county, very, very large Goodwill, and the first in the world to have a standalone professional center. And they hired me to start that back in 2012. I've known Teddy for years, and we got together, back in April or so, and decided, hey, we're both sitting at home watching our, your hair grow. And why don't we do something fun and maybe a little informative and just see where it goes? And so it's sort of taken off a bit. But yeah, for those of you that are watching, and we're at 27,000 right now, so we have room for a few more thousand. Yeah. So tell your friends.
Not much, a little bit.
But be sure if you have any questions, we do want to encourage a discussion here. So please, because I'm not that smart, I only check the chat box. So I don't want to go to the Q&A and back and forth because again, it's a lot of work, and it's a lunchtime. So anyway, let us know where you're watching this from. We've got Greensboro, we've had Italy, we've had San Francisco, we've had Canada, we've had Ohio, New York. All kinds of stuff. And one of the cool things today, and we'll get into it in more detail as we deal with biases in the job search and the hiring process, that is regional biases. We've got folks that are tuning in here from Boston, where it's hot. We have New York, Greensboro, all over. So, so much for me babbling. Teddy, take it away.
Yeah, cool. And everybody, if you don't know who I am, I'm Teddy Burris. I'm a LinkedIn strategist. And as Randy said, we've been friends for years. And I'm also a volunteer career coach and help people figure out how to get there. And so I love doing this. I love conversations and ideas. I love bringing smart people together to help people. And Randy will attest that he and I are good at finding smart people. And Val Boston, I've known Val for, I don't know, 8 years, 10 years, something like that. And I said, Randy, I know another smart guy. His name's Val. And I said, let's bring Val to the conversation so we can have a discussion. Val's business is all about helping organizations around inclusion and diversity, consulting. He does work all over the country. Been doing this for 25 years. And you know, in business and leadership roles. He does work with lots of organizations across North Carolina, and done work with Greensboro Rotaries and volunteer centers. And we used to be a member. I think, Val, are you still a member of TCC?
Sort of.
Triad Coaching Connection, great place to hang out with, again, smart people. So I brought Val to this table because of his skills, his knowledge, his experience dealing with inclusion and diversity. And that's the conversation we're going to have today, titled Job Search in a Diverse Marketplace. So Val, tell the group who you are a little bit better than I did for you.
Well, did a pretty good job. You read well there, Teddy. Val Boston, originally from Boston, have been doing this work specifically for about 12 years, but I've been have my own practice for about 25. This work is interesting, and it's also very timely given the environment we currently live in. Today is just a conversation to see, you know, how we can get better at what we do in our respective career search.
Yeah, cool. So here, Val, let's get fired off here. The first thing in my mind is, let's take that word diversity and let's put it in context to job seekers. What does that word mean? And I guess there's a couple different ways to look at it in regards to job seekers. What do you think?
Sure, absolutely. Well, you know, by definition, diversity is really differences. To make it, you know, really simple, we get hung up many times when we mention the word diversity, or the conversation is discussed around typically race and gender. But differences are much broader than that. I'm happen to be left-handed. You know, the rest, well, that means that the rest of the world is wrong, right, Randy?
You got that right.
But that's a difference. I'm originally from Boston, as I mentioned. I live in the South. I think differently. My values, my beliefs, my religion, my education, my marital status, military experience, the level that you hold in an organization or held in an organization, your tenure, whether you were an internal hire into the position or you brought in from the outside, your work experience. So when we think about diversity and we think about differences, it's much broader than we typically think about in a conversation. You know, married to that is this word inclusion. And how it relates to job search, you know, you would hope to be able to find a situation in an organization where everybody is respected, valued, and rewarded and recognized for their contribution, regardless of what they happen to look like or wherever they happen to come from. So those two words are linked. But when we think about diversity, it's really about differences, and inclusion is about an environment that allows everyone to contribute to their maximum ability.
Yeah, I get it. You know, and I'm with you, Val. We often get hung up on diversity, on the big items that we all talk about, which are important, not, you know, absolutely. But there's a lot of discrimination at all kinds of areas of who we are. And you know, there's things that we need to pay attention to as a job seeker. And we have some, I think we have some recruiters on here, some of Randy's and I's friends. See, we don't discriminate. We like recruiters too. And you know, some of them are on here. So, you know, the recruiting side, we have to pay attention to where do these discriminatories, or how about the word biases? You know, it might just be biases. So, can you take that word and play with that word in this context?
Absolutely. All of us have biases. You know, biases aren't necessarily a bad thing. Biases come from our respective life experiences. Wherever we happen to be, you you know, if you've served in the military, if you've traveled overseas, if you happen to visit, had the benefit or the not so pleasant experience of visiting a third world country, if you've driven the Pacific Coast Highway, either north to south or south to north, have you been to the Grand Canyon, all those experiences we've had from birth to 12:09 p.m. on July 29, 2020, make up who we are. And we have created for ourselves a filter or a lens based on those life experiences. So all of those things that have occurred to us or happened to us affect us, and they in fact shape these biases that we all have. Now, having a bias isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's really being aware of those biases, being self-aware, so that they don't get us in trouble, so to speak. We don't get blindsided by situations that we have, frankly, not necessarily any control over. Let me give an example in the job search.
Sure.
You have an interview with Val coming up, and you make an assumption about who Val is. It literally just happened to me an hour ago. I left a message with someone. They called back and left the message for Valerie. So you walk into the office.
Does it, Val?
Oh, it doesn't happen. So you walk into the office to meet Val, and it's a woman. I'm sorry, it's a guy, right? That immediately is going to cause a reaction of some kind. Now you got, again, being aware of your biases will help you stay out of trouble in that regard. But let's say you walk in for the interview to meet with Val, and Val happens to be a 29-year-old millennial who happens to be in charge. And you're a baby boomer like us. You know, that could then again, that again could be a challenge for you. You know, it's like working for your grandkids, if you will. Yeah. You walk in and it happens to be a woman. You know, are you going to be as responsive to a female versus a male, versus a younger person versus a person of your own generation? That person happens to be Middle Eastern. That person happens to be from the North. So all of these things that we're talking about, these biases that we all have coming from our respective life experiences, can affect how effective we can be as it relates to that initial contact with that person.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, and I've got a question. So, okay, so I'm from the North also. I was born in Jersey, raised in Rhode Island up there. Right?
Rhode Island.
A little farther south from Boston.
Yeah.
Right? There, but all right, so now I'm the candidate.
Yeah.
And I'm expecting to see, you know, Valerie, and there's a 6 foot tall senior citizen guy staring down at me because I'm a tiny guy these days. I shrunk. Did I tell you I shrunk about 2 or 3 inches in the last couple of years? So
Not weeks, years.
okay, point being, all right, so I walk in and I see something that I didn't expect, or I observe something on the wall behind you, whether it's something that's political, religious, it's something cause-oriented. Okay, we're human, so I get it that we're going to encounter things that may run counterintuitive or not what we might expect otherwise. So what can we do as a job seeker when we get face-to-face so that doesn't derail us? What are some tips you could give to job hunters?
Sure. First of all, the thing is, you don't necessarily wear your emotions on your sleeve.
Okay.
I've always believed there's a couple of things you can do to sort of make the environment, make the experience a little bit better, and that is, as you look around the room, is there something you observe in that person's office that's somewhat neutral? There's a family picture. There's a football trophy. Something that you can comment on that will sort of set you at ease. If the person happens to have an Israeli flag, you know, on those back wall, it's probably not something you want to talk about if you have a certain belief about that particular religion or people or practices that they particularly have. So there are things that you can identify that are neutral things that are safe.
Common
So,
ground. Yeah.
common ground, particularly, particularly if it's sports related and you're talking to a guy. I mean, that's an easy one. That's low hanging fruit, as they say.
Now, Val, let me stop you though. Is that a bias in itself, what you just shared?
Absolutely.
That guys like sports and that guys know sports. And yeah, so again, it's like this minefield of, okay, is it safe to assume anything? So,
Yeah.
but
Well, let me give you a real life example for me around bias.
Mhm.
This is high school now. I'm gonna take it back a long time.
10 years.
It was I grew up as a nerd. I was a nerd before the phrase was even coined. I mean, I loved to read. I was a straight A student, teacher's pet, that whole thing. So the first day of gym, way back in that year, and we're all standing in those two lines with the white t-shirts, the blue shorts, the sneakers, and socks with the red and blue stripes on them, and it's layup drills. Now, I'm a nerd. I've never touched a basketball in my life. So Coach Moran, we're in two lines. He throws the ball to the first kid. He dribbles, makes a layup, throws the ball back to the coach. He throws it to the next person, the next line, and so on and so on. It comes to me. Coach Moran has the ball. He turns to me and he says, "Boston, you don't have to shoot. I know what you can do." Now, for me, I was relieved because I would have done nothing but embarrass myself. But again, based on what I look like, he made assumptions. And the assumption was, because I'm African American, I must know how to play basketball, right? Those kind of experiences happen a lot. So when you walk into the room as a African American person, if you will, and now I'm meeting a friend, walking to Randy, there's some assumption that you may make about me subconsciously or unconsciously, and guess what? I will do the same to you.
So Val,
we will tend to prejudge others purely based on what we see, and what we see and that reaction comes from our life experience.
Is there a basketball hoop outside of your garage?
Now there is, yeah. I don't want that to happen again.
Yeah, I hear you, but I like one of the notes that I wrote when we were talking is that we have to be aware of our biases.
Yeah,
and that's really important to understand what are our biases, and then how I hate the word deal with it, but how do we understand ourselves and make sure that we manage our biases appropriately? Is that right?
That's a good point. And I think that Teddy, the answer to that is about building our own self-awareness. Okay. And how do you do that? Well, the easiest way to do it, and I think the most effective way to do it, is to spend some time with people that don't look like you.
Yeah.
And doesn't have to be an interview. It could be a virtual cup of coffee, as the world is today. With someone that you have differences with. I happen to have a Republican, I know we're going to talk about politics, a Republican friend, and we have multiple debates about our current political situation. He has his position, I have my position, and we respect the differences. But spend time with people that don't look like you. Spend time with people that don't vote like you. Spend time with people that don't necessarily like the same things that you like. And it's an opportunity to learn and grow. So guess what? The next time you have a conversation with someone that may look like this person that you've been spending time with, you might feel a little bit more comfortable.
And also, along those lines, this is something that and let's face it, as a white male working for Goodwill, I'm in a minority with my peers, especially given my age and where I from the north and all that. And so we see whether it's biases, prejudice, and all kinds of isms that are out there, ageism, racism, and all this. One thing I try to caution my clients, my peers, and anytime I'm in a group where we are talking about some, awkward subjects, and that is, don't become what you say you detest. Don't become what you say you're opposed to. And so I think it helps. It's opened my eyes a good bit. Again, I grew up in a pretty much all white community in Rhode Island, very rural. And so my experiences as a youth were greatly different from that of my kids, growing up in a more multicultural environment. So
Mhm.
I think we live and learn, but I've always tried to caution myself and others to say, you know what, don't become that bully. Don't become that person who shuns other people simply because maybe you've been shunned and you feel
Right.
like you've got to give that back to others, or
Right.
just don't become what you say you detest.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
You
I
know,
think there's another part of it. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Teddy.
no, go ahead, buddy.
No, I was going to say that some of the work that I do is working with hiring managers that show up, by the way, with bias.
Mhm.
I had a conversation with someone a couple of years ago, and he's a white male, and he said, "Val, I have a really difficult time interviewing Hispanic men." I said, "Why is that?" He said, "Well, when I was a kid, I got jumped and beat up by a bunch of Hispanic kids." So that's part of his life experience. Whenever he sees someone that he believes to be Hispanic, he immediately has a certain reaction to that. And now he is talking now. He says, I have to realize that that doesn't necessarily put everybody in that same category. I have to be careful to judge that person more objectively.
Yeah.
Yep.
So again, you show up, you don't know what that person's experiences happen to be. That's part of that self-awareness piece.
And one of the things that you reminded me of, Val, when you say, you know, hang out with people who don't look like you, I mean, that has changed my life in significant ways. When I meet people who are different from me, and you picked the 20 or 30 different ways people are different from me, politics, race, religion, sexual orientation, what's the words? The ranking in life, whatever that means to
Status,
people,
yeah.
Status, all of that. It really has created for me huge opportunities, not just for me personally, which is the most important reason, but also for my business and my career. Really huge opportunities. So thanks for reminding me of that. Hey, let's do reminder, if you guys have any thoughts or questions or a bias or diversity or discrimination question, drop it in the chat box and we'll share it with Val.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier, well, let's do this conversation. So there's how do we, let me just ask the question straight up, how do you respond differently to people who are different than you? How do you respond to people with differently in a conversation, maybe in the context of, not only race and gender but generationally, slang, how can you put yourself in the best position as a job seeker to respond to these folks who are different than us? And one more part, Val, and not embarrass ourselves.
Sure. Well, I think, again, it's about awareness of your own particular biases, but more importantly, walking in a room, meeting Randy for the first time as an example, what is it that I can say or do to make myself more comfortable in that environment? And again, those like the football trophy, I call those visual indicators, things that you see that you can comment on to sort of put yourself at ease. But I think also what's important, Teddy, is to your question is recognizing that everybody that you meet, particularly in this job search environment, has an agenda. Mm. And everybody has a different agenda. Your number one priority is no one else's number one priority. Your number one priority may be to get hired at Lowe's. Well, the hiring manager's Lowe's, guess what? Hiring you is not his number one priority.
Yeah. So
how do you get to a point where you're connected on at least level thinking relevant to those priorities? And that's about, back to the job search environment, forgetting the differences. How do I distinguish myself as a candidate from the other 497 people he's going to interview for this one position? What makes me different? And the differences are about what you bring to the table, what you can contribute that may be vastly significant in content and a value than the other candidates.
So in that context, Val, you use the phrase, and I got why you use that phrase. You said, how can I get myself comfortable?
Yeah.
The thought wouldn't it be, and I think you're going to agree with me, wouldn't it be more important for me to have that other person more comfortable with me than me be comfortable with him if I'm trying to win him over or her over?
Well, exactly. That's why I said finding something like a visual indicator that will allow you to sort of, it's the transition. You're walking in to shake the person's hand. It's the transition to the chair or to the sofa or to the round table. So what do you do in that 5 seconds to make you both feel so comfortable? And again, finding something that's neutral, finding something that you can comment on. That if I have a 12-foot sailfish mounted on my wall above my desk, that's a pretty obvious one, right? I'm pretty proud of that. I probably struggled to catch that thing, right? So if I comment on that, that's an easy one. But a family photo or things like that, that easy. Again, it's about making you both, you're right, making both parties more comfortable. But I like to call it a transition.
Yeah.
From hi, how are you to how can you help me?
Now be careful, Randy, 1 second. Be careful. Do not walk into that one guy's office who has a 12-foot blue marlin on his wall, 12-foot blue marlin on his wall, and think he caught that. Because he told me he put that up there because it messes with people's heads. So you got to ask the question. Randy, a thought?
Well, yeah, a question for you, Val. All right, so your candidate walks in and tries to look at those common ground things, or the what do you call those things? The
visual indicators.
Visual indicators.
Yeah.
But you know what? I'm still getting the vibe that old Val Boston doesn't see things my way. All right, Val's the hiring official, and I'm getting this sense that something's going on here, and you know what I'm going. So what can I do as the job seeker to try to alleviate that, if anything?
Yeah, I think many times we get hung up on a belief that the interviewer is responsible for asking all the questions. I think you should be asking significant strategic questions of the interviewer as the interviewee. And maybe asking questions is a way to get past that rub, Randy, that maybe you're feeling. You know, one of the safe questions is going to be about the business, right? It's not going to be a personal question. You know, where do you see Lowe's in the next 5 years relevant to your growth strategy? You know, that's a safe question because it's about the business. And at some point, you'll hit the nerve. When I mean nerve, meaning something that's going to trigger an opportunity for conversation. That's going to be more than yes and no, and it's going to be more than the questions that I have in front of me to ask you about your qualifications for the position.
There's a question from Kylie. It says, hello, Val. How would you handle a situation where you work at a company in which your team consists of men who are senior engineers by 20 to 25 years, and they are dismissive as to what you say? Again, this is not a job seeker, but working within a team of engineers. You've got a young, I presume that's a female, and a bunch of older male engineers that don't pay her any mind.
Yeah, you're a millennial or a Generation Xer and working with a bunch of white baby boomers, and they're engineers. What do we know about engineers?
Val, you're showing your biases, buddy.
I am. What do we know about engineers? You know, very analytical, right?
Yeah, not the most gregarious. Yeah,
not necessarily
gregarious.
Not necessarily very outgoing or gregarious. A lot of them are very serious. And what happens if you happen to be junior to them and you're opposite from a personality standpoint? You know, there's a challenge. I think the one answer is maybe you find an environment where you're going to have more diversity of of generation, where you feel an opportunity to be more respected, and because that environment that you just described obviously is not very inclusive, right? And you know, what do we say about inclusivity, Kylie? It's about being respected and valued for the contributions that you bring to the table, regardless of what you happen to look like. In this case, younger than the senior engineers in your organization. Short of that is trying to find some common ground with these individuals. If you're their children's ages, as an example, what's the possibility of having a conversation around some of the things that you happen to enjoy doing, where their kids may in fact do the same thing? So, you know, it's about creating that environment where you can have a more open communication and more collegial communication to you get to a point where you're more valued and respected for what you bring. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of, you've got to put in some effort to see if you can overcome it. You don't have to be the only one to solve the challenge, but you do have to put in some effort. And sometimes it's easy to do, and Kylie, sometimes it's not.
Sure.
So, yeah, good question.
And then the other question is, you know, are you the only one in the organization of that generation that has the same issues? Maybe there's somebody else that you can collaborate with that maybe perceives it differently and maybe has had more success communicating with these older engineer types.
Randy?
Hey, folks, we're halfway through. It's 12:30. So our guest today, Val Boston of Boston and Associates. Val, Teddy and I, we've known you for years, and we're happy that you're here today. We're talking about biases. We're talking about diversity in a diverse job marketplace. And so we invite you to chime in with questions that you have, and we'll try to address those. And again, we'll have some time at the end. Teddy and I will share a few thoughts. I've got a couple of interesting ones that have helped kind of shape me in what I do and the hiring process and such. So tune in for that. Stick around. But so Teddy, interesting topic today. Let me ask you, Val, real quick question. Are there different levels or severity of biases? Are there different names for that, or is biases or biases?
Well, I think we have to be careful. Bias as a term or a word, as I said earlier, is not necessarily a bad thing. All of us have biases. There's a big difference, however, between having bias and being and racist. You know, racism is a sickness, is a disease, again, made up of our life experiences, but our brains have processed that information a lot differently. So we should not get hung up with bias as being a bad thing. Bias is simply reflect our life experiences and how we react to stimuli every single day in our respective lives. So I think there are degrees of bias depending upon how you process your experiences. I know a friend of mine was raised by a single mom, and he works in an organization where they have what's called impact groups. I can't think of the term, but it's business resource groups, I'm sorry. And they have one of single moms because there's a large number of single moms in the group. The purpose is for folks to come together that have something in common, that they can help each other in their respective effectiveness in a job. Well, he actually joined the group because one, you know, he was raised by a single mom, and he can too bring a different perspective to the group, and it's been very, very successful. So those biases that he has, again, come from his life experience, and those are more positive. Now, the biases that we may have that may not be so positive, i.e. my friend who was beaten up by a group of Hispanic teens when he was a kid, again, that's not necessarily a positive bias. However, he's learned to be able to be more objective, and that's the key. Know your own respective biases, know what those are, become more self-aware, and get educated about it. Now, there's a couple other, I'm sorry, go ahead, Teddy.
No, go ahead, buddy, finish it up.
No, I was gonna take maybe a left turn here. You know, in this world we live today, there's a lot more remote interviewing going on, right? Being conducted by way of this technology we're currently on right now. I'd be curious to know how many of our participants today have had a remote interview, either initial one or follow-up. And recognizing that organizations are starting to see the value of remote workers.
Mhm.
We're starting to see companies saying, hey, after this situation comes back to some level of normalcy, we may have a percentage of our employees that in fact will continue to work from home, will work remotely. Now, what does that mean? It means it changes the way that we function as employees. We're obviously a lot more casual when we're working from home. And if you're working from home using a platform like Zoom, you can be half dressed.
No, we can't. Val, we can't. No.
We can't, sorry.
I can't.
Violation. Half dressed meaning the top half looks more professional than the bottom half. The other thing that is we're hearing and seeing a lot of is, as an employee or as a candidate, are we becoming more critical of organizations around their racial and social justice practices? We're starting to see employees starting to ask questions about these things of their employer. We're also seeing candidates asking questions about how an employer feels. You know, we can do research in the beginning. You go to the website and see if there's been any kind of commitment. There's been a barrage of retailers, as an example, and all of a sudden, you know, social justice becomes important. But what's the organization culture about social justice and sort of what's going on in the world, and how does that impact you as a candidate? If you're going to work, or you're potentially going to work for a company that doesn't embrace the current situation, how does that affect you as a potential candidate? So just a couple of things to turn the corner a little bit.
And now I'm with you, Randy, a second on that. I'm a big fan of any organization who realizes that it's time to adopt social justice philosophies, diversity and inclusion philosophies. For those who didn't and they start doing it, I think it's an absolutely great thing for organizations. Now listen to this word, to truly start adopting some of these business philosophies. What you have to do, I feel, as a job seeker is to truly try to understand, have they, truly, I'm using more than once now, have they truly adopted social justice and inclusion and diversity philosophies of their organization that make their company more inclusive, or is it just a Band-Aid?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you gotta do that research to figure it out. Randy,
Yeah.
I cut you off there, buddy.
Well, back to Val's point about the virtual interviewing and what that does from an employer standpoint, it says, look, we don't have to draw from the local population to find the talent that we need. And we're not going to have to relocate them from who knows where to come to our city. And so something that I was curious about, again, because you and I are from the North and so forth, is the biases that exist between different areas of the country and different cultures, if you will, the North versus the South. Where now, as an example, we're sitting here in Winston-Salem. I could hire somebody from anywhere in the country.
Tennessee.
Anywhere.
I know there's a new employee at Goodwill that lives in Tennessee.
Yep. Yeah. And so I guess on the one hand, that helps diversify the company in terms of geographic experiences. Does that, but here's my point when it comes to the visual component here. If I haven't really met you before, but I hear a very strong accent, I know you're from another part of the country, am I still more apt to hire somebody who looks and sounds more like I do? And is that, what's the crystal ball look like here, Val?
Exactly. My point about earlier about the hiring manager. What are the biases that hiring manager has when their role and responsibility is to hire the best and the brightest to fill the role? Now, if that person who happens to be from the North and happens to be from Pittsburgh with a very distinct accent, happens to be the best and the brightest, am I going to overlook that candidate because he has a different dialect? And again, that's back to the hiring manager. That's back on his becoming more objective. Conversely, I'm in the North. Am I willing to move to the South for an opportunity and put myself in a culture that's dramatically different than what I'm accustomed to? Now, I did it because I worked in Manhattan for a very long time and had enough of New York City and picked a place. Didn't know a soul and moved to North Carolina 26 years ago. And as the moving vans pulled away, I turned to my wife and I said, you know, the worst thing that can happen is we have to go back.
Mm-hmm.
That's the worst thing. And it ended up being a great decision. Randy, as well, you made a decision to move from the North.
Came down from Ohio, 20 years to the day almost.
Mm.
Oh, yeah.
With twin sons, about to enter the 7th grade, had never been here in my life.
Yeah.
And came down for an interview, and long story short, ended up sticking around.
Yeah. Well, we came down here without any jobs. We were just looking for a life change. And the first night we were here, I almost went back because I went into a restaurant, I won't name them, and it said it was a barbecue restaurant. I went in and looking for barbecue. And I said, ma'am, do you have barbecue? She said, yeah, do you want it chopped or pulled? Well, I'm used to barbecue meaning ribs. So we had a problem on the first night. Again, had to learn the different environment.
Hey, I got a story for you here. We're going to have a little fun here for a second, all right? So here I come from the North, and I came down to work in sales for a telecom company. So here I am from the North, and my boss assigned one of our coworkers to help show me the ropes about filling out paperwork and reports and kind of the day-to-day rituals of what we needed to do. So here I am. I made my very first sale, and she is the Southern Belle, and she's sitting behind me off my shoulder as I'm working, filling out my Excel spreadsheet with all of the data that we needed to collect. And then we had to print that data on a printer. So we had to export it, to the printer. So she's sitting behind me, and I'm not the smartest guy when it comes to Excel. And she said, now, Randy, you got to highlight your sale. And I said, yeah, I just made a sale. And she said, no, your sale. And I said, and I turn around, she points at my Excel spreadsheet. She says, your sale, you got to highlight your sale. The cell, right? Highlight it to export it. And I thought, you know what? I'm not in Kansas anymore, but that one little quick thing.
Sure.
Same thing with culture. The first month or so we were here in town, remember the Vantage tournament?
Mm-hmm.
Vantage tournament sponsored by Reynolds. And so anyway, so we went to Benton Convention Center. My employer was one of the minor sponsors of the event. So we went to the event and we got there very early, and at Benton Convention Center, it's huge. Well, every other place setting at all of these tables had a pack of cigarettes at it. And I didn't put two and two together. I thought, wow, there are a lot of smokers here that just wanted to reserve their seats. And somebody finally, I said, what's this? And she goes, well, don't you know, you're in tobacco country. And here I come from, a place where that wasn't the custom. So you kind of live and learn, but just a couple funny stories. That's all. Just thought I'd share.
Sure.
But that language, our dialect, our accent, our slang, all of that comes into play. And I think that one of the perspectives I have is if you're in job search, or by the way, as a business owner, I'm looking for a job every single day. I'm looking for more work every day. Yep. So I think the same way that I try to put what I do in some context to what you do, I think that it's important if we know we have an accent, if we know that we speak a little differently than the person that we're interviewing with, we should hold ourselves accountable to adjust the speed of our talk, Teddy, because I used to be and still talk a little bit too fast sometimes. We should make sure that is a bias that we have the ability to help that interviewer overcome. Val, is that fair to say?
Absolutely, absolutely true. And again, learning the different culture, learning the environments. If we're talking about a relocation for an opportunity, I moved from Boston to San Antonio, Texas, back in the mid-'70s for a job. And I walked into this guy's office, and I'm going a mile a minute. And he looked up at me and said, "Whoa there, son." And my first reaction was, "Who you calling me son?" He said, "Where you from?" And I told him. He says, "Have a seat. Sit down. Let's get to know each other a little bit before we do business." And it was a wonderful lesson about understanding the importance of relationships in that environment versus the transactional kind of a sales environment that that come from. Yeah. But again, it is our responsibility, as you said, Teddy, it is our responsibility to learn and figure that out so that we can be successful.
A little different than your experience with the word son than mine, but I remember one day that I was on the phone with a client years ago in a previous company. You can't figure out who this guy is. He very derogatorily referred to me as son.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you, there are some biases that today I have grown to realize that I need to address in a very deliberate yet professional way.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to do.
Yeah.
It's 12:45. Val, can you take what we just talked about a little bit and package that up in a few minutes statement about our responsibilities for understanding our biases and managing them in this job search process?
Yeah. Sure. I think what's most important, we've said it a number of times, it's about self-awareness. It's understanding who you are. Most of us walk around on this planet every single day without a clue of who we are. And when I say that, I don't mean, we know our names, we know our addresses, know where the car keys are. I mean, who are we as human beings? And what is your purpose? Is your purpose to be a provider? Is your purpose to be a drain on society? Your purpose is your purpose. It's not anyone else's purpose. And once you figure out what that is, as I like to say, and I try to practice this, and this has little to do with job search and more to do about being a human being, and that is to practice an act of kindness every day. Mm-hmm. Try to do something for someone else. Doesn't require recognition, but doing something for someone else every day helps us become better people. And if you're a better person, I think you become more valuable potentially to an employer. Because I think gone are the days, even in a highly competitive job market, I think gone are the days where people are hiring widgets, hiring people to plug and play. I think it's really about finding the best talent to help solve some of the business problems. Now, the other part of this, and we didn't touch on it, but Teddy, it prompted for your question. We talk about this thing about diversity, and there's a concept called diversity of thought. Mm. Diversity of thought says that and this is true, proven, if you bring people from different backgrounds and different experiences to the table, it helps us create a better solution for whatever that problem happens to be. Yeah. The best example I can give is the Chrysler 300 automobile was introduced some years ago. Some of you may remember it was introduced at a Super Bowl game. And the spokesperson for Chrysler at the time was a gentleman by the name of Eminem, a white rapper from Detroit representing Chrysler. Think about it. Chrysler, old line conservative automaker, and Eminem. Well, again, if Eminem had thought if Chrysler thought the way they'd always thought, there wouldn't be a Chrysler today. The design for that particular vehicle was presented by a young 34-year-old designer by the name of Ralph Gillies, who happened to be African American. Once again, if Chrysler thought the way they'd always thought, there'd be no Chrysler. So diversity of thought, many times it has been proven that creates a better answer, a better solution, than you typically get if you bring together a whole bunch of white men in a room and you're going to get this. What's the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing the same way and expecting a different response.
You get it. Yeah.
So to the job search thing, it's really becoming more self-aware, understanding who you are, recognize that you are not that hiring manager's number one priority, even though you may be, the position may be your number one priority. It's an important, I think, an important piece of being an effective human being is being more self-aware. How do we contribute more to society if we don't know who we are?
Two things. Was the 300 in the Lee Iacocca days or post Lee Iacocca?
It was during the Lee Iacocca days.
Yeah, smart man. He did that company well for many years.
He did.
And I'm with you, Val. I think the one thing I'm taking away from this conversation with you today is this whole idea of self-awareness. I got it. I understood it, but you really amplified that thought in my head. So, buddy, thanks a lot. I really appreciate you showing up today and sharing. And so
I appreciate the invitation. Hopefully there's been an opportunity for folks that participate. Of the 29,000 that were online, you know, share some ideas and thoughts, and who knows where it goes. Thanks again for the invite.
If you want to hear more about Val Boston, you want to discover more from him, it's Val Boston III. And I think I've met Val Boston IV.
Yes, you have.
I have. Look for him on LinkedIn. It's not hard to spell. It's Val Boston, just like the state. And follow him on LinkedIn, hunt down his website. Good guy and always willing to help. I can testify to that. So
thank you, folks.
Yeah. So hey, Randy, I got it. I got my story, man. You got yours? You want to go first?
I'll make one up. Well, all right. Yeah.
You're going to make one up?
You said it was a story. Let me tell you about a time. It was a dark and stormy night. But a friend of mine, and I've heard this before, and to kind of layer on with what Teddy said, a friend used to say, as we know better, we do better. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about being self-aware, a lot of times I feel like Forrest Gump. You know, I just sort of, like a lot of people in life, you just sort of land here and then you land there and this happens and it just happens. And then next thing you wake up and you're 60 years old or whatever. And so are we living a purposeful life? And is what we're doing, are we doing it with awareness that we have a purpose? Again, to your point, Val. So I think purpose is important. And when we realize what that is, that helps us channel our energies toward a career that is fulfilling, or at least makes us aware that we need to give back in some way. We need to do something that feeds that inner self, if you will. Here's my story, though, and a true story. I used to do this kind of work in Ohio for a number of years. Had an African-American accountant, again, in the Columbus, Ohio area, who was about to consider an accounting position with a company in Atlanta. And I said, so are they going to fly you down there? And she goes, well, they hadn't really talked about it, and I said, well, you know, that's a long haul. I mean, you're just going to go down there sight unseen. And she said, well, I'll ask them. So anyway, she did. She asked, and they flew her down there. And she came back and said, Randy, I'm glad that I did that. She said, I went down to Atlanta, and I was the only African-American in the entire department. And I would have been the only female in the entire department. And she said, nobody looked like I did. I just felt so alone that alone was a showstopper. Now, this was back in the 90s. Have things changed? Somewhat, maybe, but not universally. And one other story, and I've shared this, Teddy, I haven't shared this with you before, I don't think. I'll try to be brief, and it's kind of an emotional thing, but it sort of helped, I guess, put things in perspective and try to see how others, some of the things, particularly Val being African-American, how you interact. I was a program director at a radio station in Ohio in my early 20s, and I was about to hire an African-American female to be a part-time radio person at the station. Well, the older white radio announcers went to the station owner and said, we don't want this person hired. Clearly based on race. And so the owner came to me, and I was, again, a young man in my probably early 20s. And he said, Randy, you got to tell her no, because you're not both going to be on this payroll. It's either you or her. And I had to call her. I was scared because, I had a young wife, we were having kids, and I had to tell her that we put the job on hold simply because of race. And I said, damn it, I never want to do that again. I was scared. I didn't have any money. I should have just said, you can take that opinion and go where you want to with it, where the sun doesn't shine. But I was scared. And I vowed to myself, if ever that were to come up again, that I would have a different response. And so while, life's a journey and you learn from stuff, that was a big one and a big eye opener for me, and helps to give me a bit of an appreciation for how people like you, Val, based on race, based on, you mentioned Middle East, based on gender, based on you name it. There's a big world out there. And I think we've got to be open to those who don't look and act exactly like we do. And that was one prime example that says, man, that's just not right. So anyway, so much for the true confession, but a true story. And it stuck with me to this day. And it was very, I learned a lot. It was also very painful. So anyway.
Yeah, I get it, buddy. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Hey, before I share my stories that I want, my perspective about biases and inclusion and diversity, next week, on the 5th of August, that means we're into the second half, kids, starting next week. Next week, we have Damian Burkle. Damian is the founder of a group called Professionals in Transition. And Damian's going to put together some talking points and a conversation around the emotional curve of job search. So it could be another really good conversation next week. So, and if you have any other ideas or suggestions, somebody sent me a suggestion not too long ago, and I've engaged on that and working on that idea. We want your suggestions of topics and speakers. Because as smart as Randy and I are, as highly as connected as we are to the world, I'm being really bold there, aren't I, buddy? We don't know everybody, and we surely don't know every topic that is important to you. So let me share with you something, my perspective of biases. And Val said this earlier on, that we don't all wear our biases on our sleeves. Well, I'll offer that for many of us who are job seekers, or those of us who want to build a professional and personal brand, we got to be careful, because often we do put our biases out there and we don't think about it. And here's the context. Social media is designed to screw us up because we let it do it. Because we jump on social media and we share our biases often, not all of us, some of us are getting smarter. We share our biases with reckless abandon on social media. By the way, the content we share, the content we engage on, whether it's in a positive or negative way, the ease of us to get into conversations on social media is just a huge heat sink for all of our biases. So think about that. Think about the content you touch on social media. Think about the arguments that you can get into on social media, and how does that show your biases? And so I get it. Val's absolutely right. I believe it. I've got biases that I've lived with for my pulling 60 years, 62 as a matter of fact. I'm not biased about that. And I think that it's important that we manage our biases appropriately. And unfortunately, there are many of us who get on social media and we let that destroy our management of our biases. So just a thought. So, hey, we did good, Randy. We did this in an hour. You know?
We did. I tell you, time goes by fast. Val, it's been it used to help us at our events, and gosh, we just don't have any in-person events anymore. So it's good to see you again. Good to know you're doing well, and thanks again for sharing your knowledge and your personality too. I tell you, I've known you for years, and I consider you a friend, and you're just a good guy. You really are. So I really appreciate you coming out. Yeah. Hope you'll come back again sometime. And
I'd love to come back again. I appreciate the opportunity. I can go now, put on my t-shirt now, be more comfortable.
Hang on, let me get rid of mine.
Take off your purple shirt.
Oh, Randy, I told you, you have to wait till after 1. All right, folks.
Have a great day.
See you guys.
Val, Randy,
Yeah.
y'all take care. Everybody,
All right.
good seeing you. We'll see you in a week.
Take
All
care.
right.